The aircraft leveled off at 35,000 feet, cruising smoothly above a blanket of clouds that looked peaceful enough to fool anyone into believing nothing could go wrong. The cabin lights were dimmed, the engines hummed with a steady rhythm, and most passengers had settled into the quiet boredom of a long-haul flight. Coffee cups rattled softly on tray tables, seatbelts clicked as people shifted, and somewhere near the back, a baby whimpered before being gently hushed. Among the flight attendants moving through the aisle was a woman named Lena Carter, her posture calm, her smile professional, her movements precise but unremarkable. To everyone watching, she was just another crew member doing her job. No one noticed the way her eyes constantly scanned the cabin, counting faces, noting body language, tracking exits. No one suspected that beneath her neatly pressed uniform was a mind trained for war. The first sign of trouble came not with shouting, but with silence. A man in seat 14C stood up without unbuckling his seatbelt properly, his movements stiff, rehearsed. Another rose near the rear galley at the same moment. Lena felt it before she saw it, the instinctive tightening in her chest that came from years of training she had tried to leave behind. Her hand paused for half a second on the beverage cart, then continued moving as if nothing were wrong. When the man in 14C pulled a handgun from inside his jacket, the cabin erupted into screams that bounced off the walls like shrapnel. "Everyone stay seated," the man shouted, his voice cracking with adrenaline. A second hijacker produced what looked like an explosive device, wires dangling just enough to make it convincing. Panic spread instantly. Passengers ducked, cried, clutched their loved ones. Lena raised her hand slowly like the others, her face a mask of fear, but her mind was already racing through scenarios. Hijacking. At altitude. Unknown destination. Unknown intent. She caught the captain's eye through the open cockpit door just as the hijackers pushed their way forward. The cockpit door slammed shut moments later, locking out the rest of the crew. The aircraft shuddered slightly as the autopilot disengaged. Overhead bins rattled. The plane began a shallow turn that hadn't been on the flight plan. A sob escaped somewhere nearby. Lena lowered herself into a jump seat, her breathing controlled, counting in fours like she'd been taught long ago. She remembered another cockpit, years earlier, smaller, louder, filled with the smell of jet fuel and sweat. She remembered a helmet instead of a scarf, a flight suit instead of a uniform, a call sign crackling over the radio. She had sworn she would never fly like that again. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The hijackers made their demands known over the intercom, voices shaking as they ordered the captain to change course. The captain argued. The argument ended abruptly with a gunshot that echoed through the cabin. No one could tell if anyone had been hit, but the message was clear. The plane was no longer under lawful control. Lena felt the shift in the aircraft's pitch, too steep, too aggressive for a civilian turn. Whoever was flying up there didn't know what they were doing. Then the engine coughed. It was subtle at first, a hiccup in the steady hum, but Lena felt it through the floor, through her bones. She looked toward the wing and saw a flicker of orange, then smoke. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. One of the hijackers shouted into the cockpit. The plane dipped sharply, sending loose items tumbling. Passengers screamed as oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling, swinging wildly. Lena's training took over completely now, her fear dissolving into cold focus. The intercom crackled, then went dead. A moment later, the cockpit door burst open and one of the hijackers stumbled out, blood spreading across his shirt. He collapsed in the aisle, eyes wide and unseeing. Behind him, the cockpit was chaos. The captain slumped over the controls, unmoving. The remaining hijacker stared at the instruments in horror, hands shaking as alarms blared around him. He turned toward the cabin, eyes wild, and screamed that he couldn't control the plane. Lena didn't think. She moved. She sprinted forward as the plane lurched, grabbing seatbacks for balance, ignoring the shouts behind her. She reached the cockpit just as the hijacker turned the gun on her. She stopped, hands raised, voice calm and steady in a way that surprised even her. She told him she could help, that she had training, that they were going to die if he didn't let her sit down. The truth was naked in her eyes, and desperation makes people reckless. The hijacker hesitated, then shoved her toward the pilot's seat and staggered back. The moment Lena's hands touched the controls, everything clicked into place. The instruments spoke to her like an old language she had never forgotten. Airspeed dangerously low, altitude dropping, one engine compromised. She adjusted the throttle, eased the yoke, countered the roll with instinctive precision. The aircraft responded, sluggish but alive. The ground warning alarm screamed in protest, then softened as the nose lifted just enough. Passengers watched from the open cockpit door in stunned silence as the flight attendant transformed into something else entirely. Her movements were sharp, economical, her eyes flicking from gauge to gauge, calculating angles, lift, fuel burn. She barked commands to the remaining crew member who had crawled forward, telling him to secure the hijacker, to check the engine status, to relay instructions back to the cabin. Her voice carried authority that brooked no argument. Outside, clouds rushed past the windshield as Lena stabilized the aircraft. She radioed a mayday, her voice steady despite the chaos, identifying herself, explaining the situation in clipped, professional terms that made air traffic control fall silent for a beat before responding. She ignored the shaking in her hands, the memories clawing at the edges of her mind. This wasn't a combat jet. It was heavier, slower, full of innocent lives. There would be no ejection seat this time. The damaged engine began to fail completely, its readings dropping fast. Lena shut it down before it could tear itself apart, compensating with rudder and trim, keeping the plane flying on one engine. Sweat ran down her back beneath the uniform. She could feel every vibration, every protest from the airframe. The aircraft was wounded, but it was still airborne. Air traffic control guided her toward the nearest suitable runway, but it was far, and fuel was bleeding faster than anyone liked. Lena did the math in her head, calculating glide ratios, emergency procedures, alternate fields. She announced over the intercom that they were making an emergency landing and instructed passengers on brace positions, her words calm, reassuring, as if this were just another safety demonstration. People listened because they had no choice, and because something in her tone made them believe. As the plane descended, turbulence rocked the cabin violently. Screams rose again, prayers whispered in a dozen languages. Lena flew through it, hands light on the controls, working the plane like a living thing rather than a machine. She remembered night landings on damaged runways, remembered bringing broken birds home on instinct and stubbornness. This was no different, she told herself. It was just heavier, and the stakes were higher. The runway came into view at last, shorter than ideal, surrounded by lights and emergency vehicles. Lena lined up the approach, compensating for the dead engine, keeping speed just above stall. The plane shuddered as she dropped the landing gear. Alarms wailed again, but she ignored them. Her world narrowed to the strip of asphalt rushing toward her. The touchdown was hard, bone-jarring, but controlled. Tires screamed. The aircraft bounced once, then settled. Lena slammed the remaining throttle into reverse, stood on the brakes, fighting the pull to one side. The end of the runway rushed closer. For a terrifying second, it looked like they wouldn't stop in time. Then the plane slowed, shuddered, and finally rolled to a halt in a cloud of smoke and rubber. Silence fell. Then the cabin exploded with cheers, sobs, laughter, people clinging to strangers as emergency crews swarmed the aircraft. Lena sat in the cockpit, hands still on the controls, breathing hard, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on her all at once. She closed her eyes, just for a second. When she stepped out into the daylight, cameras were already flashing. Officials surrounded her, questions flying faster than she could answer. Someone wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. A reporter asked how a flight attendant could land a crippled jet like a combat pilot. Lena shook her head, exhaustion finally winning. She said she had once been something else, a long time ago, and today, she had just remembered who she was. In the days that followed, her story spread everywhere. People called her a miracle, a hero, an angel at 35,000 feet. She refused interviews at first, then finally agreed to one, not for fame, but to remind people that heroes don't always look the way you expect. Sometimes they wear quiet smiles and serve coffee. Sometimes they've lived whole other lives you'll never know about. And if this story of courage, hidden strength, and impossible survival moved you, remember that more stories like this are waiting for you on this channel. Subscribe to Her World Stories, where ordinary people reveal extraordinary truths when it matters most.